Well, in today's episode, I have with me Carlos Ortiz. How you doing, Carlos?
Doing great, man. Really good.
It's fun to have you on the show. I've had John Burke a couple of times, and you are now our senior pastor. We've been working together since 2020. You came on really leading the North Austin campus and eventually our lead for the executive team. But man, 1 year as our senior pastor, it's been
Yeah.
amazing. You're doing a great job. What have you discovered about yourself or about the role in this last year?
Yeah, I am first of all, I'm good to be with you. Second, I'm continually learning. So one of my gifts is learner. And so it's interesting how when you get into learner mode, at least for me, I can go hyperactive and I'm just learning everything and absorb information and read books and all the stuff that learners like to do. I think sometimes the hard thing for learners is to stop and learn about yourself in light of what you're reading, in light of the podcast, in light of life change. So I'm learning a lot about myself right now and then finding things to grow and learn from based on what I'm learning about myself. So that being said, I think I'm learning a couple things. One, what does it really mean to be humble? Um, Whether that's I'm choosing to position myself to be humble or being humbled by situations. And they're two very different things. And I think being lead exec and teaching pastor at some great churches around the country, you get humbled quite a bit, especially leading staff. But as senior pastor, you are in a position to be humbled every day. It's a different thing, man. It's a different thing where I'm not just, being criticized the once every 6 weeks I teach. I'm teaching every week, and so preparing my heart for that. But I also do love feedback. So I have to I'm also a glutton for punishment. So I got to have all these things going on. I'm learning about myself, but I'm also learning where some of my boundaries are there. Like I can take pretty hard feedback and tough conversations, but there's just some days I'm like, I don't want to hear from anybody. I don't want to talk to anybody. And I've never really experienced that. I have 28 years of ministry. I mean, you know me, like I love being with people and processing and finding the last year, especially the last 6 months, just finding where I need days to just be with Jesus and how important that is with this new lens. So there's one thing I'm learning. The other thing I'm learning is how my family responds to being more in the spotlight. Um, I think they're doing pretty well at it, to be honest with you.
Sure.
I think they're learning a lot about themselves too, though, right? People have been great. People have been supportive, really encouraging to my kids and to my wife and I have adult children. And so, but they're all processing what they're learning about themselves in this because they've been on the journey with me, right?
Mhm.
So our mode of family is our kids are in the journey with us. And so they're at that family table. We talk about what's happening, what God is doing, all the different shifts in our life over the last 20 plus years. And so it's a chance for them to learn about themselves too as we settle into being in Austin. So long answer, but those are some things I'm learning.
Well, you're doing an amazing job. I love teaming with you. And I think really the way you and John Burke worked so well together to transition.
Mm.
There are a lot of churches out there that may be on the verge of going through a succession. I know not all our church leaders will be in that experience, but they may be part of a church that does go through that. What are some things you learned about the succession that you think helped make it so smooth, so seamless, so healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about this as well. I think first and foremost was we didn't try to do it by ourselves. John's a really smart guy, former engineer, written books. I consider myself halfway smart, right? And consulted churches. And yet the first thing we did when he said, "Would you say yes to this?" and they invited me in, I said I had some contingencies. And it wasn't to strong arm the conversation. It wasn't to have a higher salary. It wasn't for any of those things of negotiation. It was so that we could care for people really well. And those people include the people of our church, our staff, and our families. And so the way we did that is the first decision we made was to bring outside counsel. We brought in a guy named Nate Roosh, who's a great friend of mine, senior pastor of Emmanuel Christian Center up in Minneapolis. And he consults one church a year. He's still senior pastor, and he helps one church a year through succession. It's what he did his thesis on for his doctorate. And he said yes to us. And that was a game changer because he brought leadership to our board and our spiritual overseers, brought leadership to John and I, brought leadership to our executive team, and just invested in us. And so I would say, one, don't do it by yourself. I have enough humility to say we need somebody who doesn't have a vested interest other than the kingdom of God to walk us through this. So that's important. Two, some of the things that really got brought up is we created space for us to speak our last 10%. And in order to do that really well, John and I didn't do that in the same space. So John was able to speak his last 10% with the spiritual overseers, our board, and Nate as our consultant. And then in a different space, I was able to speak my last 10%. That could be around, finances. It could be around leadership. It could be around structure, staffing, and timing. And then the outside counsel took both those conversations and then helped it become as seamless as possible. And I think one of the things that I think I learned in this that I have not seen other churches do is we also talked about how does this impact our wives. Neither one of us are in a place where, not necessarily theologically, but practically, neither one of our wives want to be co-pastors with us. And so that was great that we were on the same page as far as the role of our spouse within the local church. And both of us believe in women leading and doing those kinds of things. But the board did a good job of just trying to honor Kathy, John's wife, and honoring my wife in the same process, and not just making it about the two figureheads making the transition. And I think they both felt seen in that process. So I think that's helpful. Of course, it's not seamless, right? But the goal is that the staff and our people wouldn't feel that or be projected onto our people. And I think what that's done is it's made John and Kathy our biggest cheerleaders. I mean, we get texts from them every week. Kathy's like yelling me down from the side of the stage, like go Carlos, so it's really encouraging. But I think it's because the process was healing for them and they were seen. I think the other thing is that we went through a year and we were open with our staff about it. You were there, you were on executive team and the staff, and some of our staff who had been at other churches found a lot of healing in that process. That John and I did it together. We were upfront about it. We honored one another. And so honoring is a really important deal. This is a little side note. Churches that have a culture of honor, healthy culture of honor, means it's a two-way street. See, there's a lot of churches that have a culture of honor, but it's usually up to my leader, to my pastor, to our board, and there's a lot of fluff in the language around it. But true honor is actually a two-way street. And so we try to honor our staff with honesty and transparency, honor our people with honesty and transparency, and then honor one another. So it wasn't just about these two guys, changing churches.
Yeah. Yeah. Right behind you is a picture of that day. That Austin FC jersey was part of what he gave you. That's right. Yeah. The Michigan jersey, I'm not sure why is up there, but
Go blue, baby.
but I do think the way you honor John, the way John so willingly, passed that mantle, so to speak, it was a really beautiful experience. I was really just so pleased with how well it went. And you have lots of experience from before. I mean, you've been in Dallas Fort Worth at a large church there. You're part of Life Church up in Seattle. All these experiences leading up to now, and then navigating through the pandemic. I mean, that's when you came to Gateway, was January 2020. We became executive pastors at the exact same time, and who would have known what was to come? But I do think the way you openly communicate and kind of insist on feedback and transparency has been really helpful for us. Maybe talk through how we led through the pandemic. I mean, we have church campuses in 3 different counties, so every county was responding differently. Yeah. Travis, the most liberal progressive county, where some of our campuses are in South Austin, Central Austin, and then Williamson and Hayes, which are still much more, well, Williamson probably 50-50 in terms of
Right.
Republican, Democrat, Hayes probably a little bit more conservative.
Mhm.
What do you think helped us move through that season when so many churches were being blown up and divided? We didn't shy away from talking about important things, but what do you think was helping us? I mean, what was your with all the experience you had, what did you bring to the table, or what did you want to make sure we did that helped us get through that so well?
Yeah, I think my initial response would be we just worked our butts off.
Well, that's true too. Yeah.
That is true, and you were part of that. And for those who are listening today, like our executive team, I don't necessarily say we should do this all the time, but I mean, 80-hour weeks were the norm.
Yeah. It was
And we did
nuts.
that for probably far too long, but it was at least 6 months of 80-hour weeks because we felt there was an importance of clear communication. And so people are glued to their televisions, they're glued to social media. What is happening every day? What's shutting down? What's not shutting down early on? What's open? What's not open? And if we, and I'm proud of us, we took a step back and we said, how are the people experiencing the world right now? And the people are experiencing, my city government is saying this, my county government is saying this, my state government is saying this, then my country is saying this, then the world is saying this. Talk about a formula for confusion. And we serve a God who's not a God of confusion. And so we wanted to be a people who didn't bring confusion. And so in a world with so much language, we tried to bring simplicity. And I think, Eric, I think we would agree about 90% of the people appreciated it. And there were 10% of the people, polar opposites, who hated it because they thought we should do certain things or don't do certain things. And then it grew. It grew from pandemic to social unrest to racial reconciliation and I mean finance and the economy. Then it was a presidential election. There was all sorts of things happening. And if we're not careful, we were letting the polar opposites create the language for the 90%.
Mhm.
And I think you and I had a conversation, then I talked with John about it, and I said, not to humble brag here, but we're pretty smart people. You have a doctorate, John's got his degrees, I have my degrees, we've been to school, we have Charles in our team, we have Susie, everybody's educated, smart, led people for a long time, been part of corporate America, consulted churches, and we're going to abdicate the language to the culture. And so what we did is we took our time to find the language that was right for us, that was both biblical, that was simple, and that was just good leadership for people.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, and we gave ourselves time. That was the other thing. And so we didn't necessarily reconstruct our church right away. Our people responded, our giving went up over the next few years because people felt they were being led well, right? Our staff didn't have to worry about their jobs, all those things that really gave us space. And so that's how we navigated it. But it's not like we didn't take hits. It's not like we didn't lose a few thousand people. It's not like we didn't lose. And here's how awesome God is. I don't know the latest number, but at one point we lost about 15% of our giving, tithing giving, from people who moved to be closer to their grandkids or moved to early retirement. And yet somehow giving went up because there were new people coming to Christ and new people growing their faith and on their journey. We call it journey to generosity. They
Mhm.
started that journey to generosity, and we stopped using some of the language around tithing, even though it's something we believe in, and really got to the heart of people and connecting to the heart of God. And it took a lot of just communication and a lot of time and a lot of brain power and trying things that didn't work, trying things that did work, but it came from a heart of humility. And I'm proud of you and Charles and Susie and the team that we had for that season that we just worked well together. We fought it out sometimes. We talked it out other times. Um, and John let us lead. That was the other thing. John will talk about this openly, and I won't go into detail, but John was coming out of a very tough season of leadership. of a lot of change and people leaving, and there's some trauma that happened in our church before I got here. You were here for that. So John was already depleted when the pandemic hit. I come in bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, I had a few months off. I'm like, dude, and I remember going to John, it's like, just let me lead. And he did, man. And when he did that, he sent a message to you and Susie and Charles and our church. I'm going to rely on this team. And it just brought a spirit of humility about us. And but yeah, I think that's how we initially navigated. There's a lot of things we could dive into outside of that, but I think it was a posture of, we're not going to let the world, church world, racial reconciliation world, the government, we were not going to let outside forces speak into how we shepherd the people in the city God's called us to.
Yeah.
And yeah, that took a lot of intentionality.
Yeah, and it's very, simply just as you said, kind of knowing the people we're serving and not giving into buzzwords or kind of whatever the uproar was at the time, just kind of continuing to point people towards Jesus, point people towards community, and each campus kind of restarted at different times. We had different rules in different parts of the city, kind of based on where we were. But I want to talk now, just as we've 4 years from that time of the pandemic, we don't have, at least at my campus, we don't have all the people that had been coming weekly back. Some moved, as you mentioned, but some have gotten into the habit of just online is easier, you know. What are some of the ways you think churches, and certainly we can take what we're learning here in Austin and share about that, but what do you think are the most important things for church leaders to make sure they're doing now in this season, post-pandemic? Attendance is less frequent. Leadership may be harder to find. What are you advising other churches, and what are you seeing for us that we need to continue to do to just rebuild in this season?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I don't think it's tough for us. We already have our own battles here at Gateway, and you're in the middle of that with us. I think by taking our time, we started allowing ourselves to let certain ideas or dreams die and say, okay, God, if you are preeminent, and we believe he is, and he's all powerful and all knowing, we can't assume that what we were doing before the pandemic was the way to do it anyway. And so we've asked ourselves, and we continue to ask the question, what needs to change? What needs to shift? We use the language around is it healthy? And is it sustainable? Right? And there's a lot of things we did at Gateway that were great for that season, but they weren't healthy necessarily or sustainable. And every church has that. No church is fully healthy and fully sustainable. But asking yourselves those questions, because we have to fight our own tendencies to want to go back to a glory day, of going back to something where we had particular wins. And I'll give you an example of what I'm seeing now that really is bothering me. And I won't tell you where I read it, but I've read it in multiple places. And it's something to consider, but it's not something that we're going to use as a litmus test at this point. And it is a tension for pastors, and that is the old adage of butts and seats, people being in physical attendance. I think it is important. I shared a story last weekend. I met a guy in downtown Austin, and he goes to your campus actually. And he said, I've been coming 8 weeks in a row, and it's changed my life. I'm like, why 8 weeks in a row? He's like, well, why would I stop coming if it's changing my life? And I thought, man, what would happen if people had that mentality, right? And so we want to grow that. And yet, what are we missing if we just focus on butts and seats on Sunday? And in my opinion, as a shepherd, and those of us who are called to shepherd, there's different kinds of shepherds, right? There's true shepherd pastors, there's leader shepherds. I'm more of a leader shepherd. But if we don't take time to step back and say, who are my people? How do we measure that? And so one of the things that we did in the pandemic that we still do now is, what is our span of care? Now, we don't do this to blow smoke. We don't do this to blow ourselves up. Oh, this is amazing. I'll be transparent here. We average between 24 to 2,700 people a weekend, butts and seats, right? But active people, part of our church that we can measure, their kids are involved, students are involved, they're in groups, they give. I mean, there's other ways to measure. They serve 6,500, right? Before the pandemic, we would say, you can't tell me 6,500 because you're just exaggerating. It's 2,700. And yet, how many times did we not then create systems and structure and care and messages for the 6,500? It's like looking at Jesus and said, yeah, we know you have 5,000 people on the hillside, but who really walks with you? 12? You have a church for 12. And I think for us, it's allowed us to expand our heart. Now, do we have more than that who come to our church? Yeah, we guess somewhere, 75, 8,000 people make their rotations at Gateway. Yeah, but we don't go to magazines and proclaim we're a church of 8,000. We don't go and submit we're a church of 6,500. When people ask us how many attend, we're honest, 24 to 2,700. We just leave it there, right? But behind the scenes, how you and I prepare as executives, how we prepare for our church, we prepare for the 6,500. And I'm not sure if we would have done that pre-pandemic,
Yeah.
right? And say, okay, God, our shepherd's heart is for the sheep who are scattered. And what I love, Eric, and you and I are seeing and experiencing this over the last year, we're seeing people who felt cared for, even though they didn't come to church, coming back to church.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder if you and I would be experiencing that if we just focus on the ones who are coming.
That's good. Yeah.
You know? And so it's keeping that open arms. It's that father saying the prodigals will come home, but even if they don't, there's more coming, right?
Yeah.
And how would the story have changed if the son came home with the humility and the brokenness, and the dad was like, dude, we've moved on.
Yeah.
The story's different.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think we've tried to have the posture of the father, the prodigal father, over the top. You're back. We're glad you're back. Treat them like they never left. And
Yeah.
I think what I'm seeing a little bit is I'm seeing in some circles, podcasters, people, I think unintentionally going back to some old things that, dude, I don't want to go back to. I'll give you another one. People are asking me, when are we going to bring in so and so to speak and so to preach? And what about this guest speaker and that guest speaker? And I'm like, that is, and I want to use this phrase. Maybe we should coin it, Eric. That's so pre-pandemic.
That's good.
It doesn't mean we won't ever have guest speakers, but we're going to have it through a lens of what are they going to bring to our people for where they are now? Not because they're a name, not because they have a book, because they have a message to share for our people, right?
Yeah.
So let's keep that post-pandemic.
I love it. Well, I love getting the team with you. Thanks for spending some time today, Carlos. Grateful for you.
Yeah, man.